Before we start the podcast and all, I just want to give a couple disclaimers. A lot of the shit I say in the podcast is, episode, interview, whatever, discussion. We'll call it a discussion. How about that? A lot of things I say during this discussion came out really redundantly, and I was giggling like a motherfucker the entire time, dude, laughing and everything. It was a little too tipsy, but anyways. That's besides the point. I really do hope you enjoyed this episode with Tucker Beers, so let's get right in. Okay, hey there, everybody. If today's episode, we're going to be talking with Tucker Beers about the real-life application for tactics in Tarkov. And if you don't know Tucker Beers, Tucker, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been streaming Escape from Tarkov for about the last year, on and off. I'd say probably a solid 6 months of experience doing it. Prior to that, I spent 8 years in the Army, all of it in the infantry, and the last 4 of it in either special reconnaissance applications. It's actually called RISTA, very similar to LURS or LERP. It's just non-airborne capable, either as a reconnaissance squad leader or as a sniper section sergeant.
Okay, well, thank you. Today I brought you on here to talk about small unit movement in Tarkov, the application of real-world tactics into Tarkov, of how to move, like a fireteam size element.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk about this with someone who actually knew what the fuck they were talking about, because I tried to do it and it came out all wrong, so I wanted to do, a pseudo-interview with someone who might have more insight into it. You being in the military and also playing Tarkov.
Yeah, I do have quite a little bit of experience in small unit maneuvers and tactics.
Yeah, so per your suggestion, I did read a teeny bit about of the Ranger's Handbook. Not all of it, obviously. But in something that interested me was you did a video a while ago, and if anyone doesn't know what that is, I'll link it up on the screen. It was on the principles of patrolling, and that was about how to maneuver yourself accordingly and how to plan out a raid, and a lot about reconnaissance and squad setup and all of that. So I don't want to go much into patrolling because you already did a fantastic explanation of that. I don't want to
Thank you.
cover ground that has already been done, but I did want to go over chapter 6-1, which is formations and how those can apply to Tarkov. Because I've thought a lot about it, and I think that Tarkov, personally, is too fluid for the proper use of formations. However, I don't really know, because a lot of the people I play with, I play duos and trios, and I know you've run a lot of squads in real life in a Tarkov game. You see what I mean? So, can you just tell me a little bit about how that might, if there's any cross-relation between those two things?
Yeah, sure. So I did my homework, and I knew you were going to be talking about the Ranger Handbook this evening. So actually, I brought my copy, which has been my copy. Let's see. You are probably looking at a newer version than mine. Mine's the February 2007. I've had actually this handbook since 2011. It's actually got private beers written on it, and I bound it in duct tape, so it's nigh on indestructible at this point. But yeah. So looking at chapter 6, specifically, like you said, 6-1, they talk about a few different formations. There's 6 to be precise. Realistically, the ones that you're going to see most often, the ones you're going to see applied most often concerning the fire team, is going to be either the wedge or the echelon. And that, whether it is the wedge or the echelon, first of all, those terms are used interchangeably. They are, legitimately different things, but I cannot tell you how many times I've heard somebody actually say, all right, we're doing an echelon formation. It's, I can count them on one hand out of over 8 years. Typically what you hear is, fire team wedge, echelon left or echelon right. And more often than even that, it ends up being fire team wedge, heavy left or heavy right. And you say heavy left or right because if you're operating solely as a fire team, then chances are everybody that's carrying an M4 also has either a M203 or the newer version of the M320, which is like it's a HK. It's capable of being used as a standalone, which is actually how most people prefer to use it.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I was under the assumption most people use an underbarrel, but I don't have much experience with underbarrels. So.
Well, the issue with that is it adds so much weight to the front end of the gun, especially if you're planning on doing any CQB or room clearing or anything like that. It really makes it impractical to maintain a low or a high ready for an extended period of time.
A mechanic that will be coming to Tarkov, incidentally.
I can't wait. I can't wait. One cool thing about, just to go on a little bit of a tangent here, one cool thing is when you run the 320 standalone, it does have a collapsible stock similar to like an MP7, but most people will also eschew that entirely, and they just run probably about 6 inches of paracord with a carabiner at the end, and it gets clipped straight onto your body armor. And so whenever you want to use it, you can just drop your rifle, and it's almost like you've seen people shoot like MP5Ks on like sling tension. Yeah. That's how you shoot the 320. And then when you're done with it,
when you have like a gas mask or a face shield. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no. And I mean, it's probably one of the more practical ways to use it, because it is, after all, an area of effect weapon. And once you spend a little bit of time with it, you don't even need the leaf sights. You just, man, you can feel it in your bones where it's going to go.
I think that was actually, I was, sorry, to also go on a little tangent. In one of the reports I was seeing about the use of the thumper, that I think it was the M79, the original, like, U.S. Army, or not the original, but like one of the first U.S. Army, 40 mil grenade launchers. Most soldiers would just stop using the iron sights at a certain point after their usage.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's not really the same with Tarkov, but yeah,
right.
Which would, you don't need the stock or the optic, whatever.
Anyway, getting us back to topic. Say fireteam wedge, heavy left or heavy right. That's defining which side of the wedge you're loading your squad automatic weapon on. Whether that's the M249 or, more than likely, when you're in country, it's going to be a Mark 48, unless you just have a very poor or poorly funded unit, or a unit that's not great at logistics, which happens about as often as you would expect with a government agency. But a Mark 48, it's the same platform as a 249. It's just chambered in 7.62 NATO. So it's, only about a pound or two heavier than a standard saw, but it's got a lot more to say.
Interesting. And what do you mean by underfunded? Like, how can a unit specifically be underfunded?
So you gotta think, like, okay, if I asked you to just off the top of your head name, an infantry division that's active in the Army right now.
Okay, I know nothing about the U.S. military. It's really out of my expertise.
So chances are you're going to think like, the 101st Airborne or the 82nd Airborne. And some people think like, 10th Mountain, stuff like that. The 101st and the 82nd especially are these, storied divisions that have roots all the way back to World War II. And they've ridden that reputation, all the way into contemporary military, where they get more or less the most attention from the Department of Defense when it comes to funding and, the issuing of funds. Man, I could talk all day about this.
Is it kind of like a PR thing, or is there an actual, like, does the qualification bar get set higher when you're trying to apply to one of these more storied units like the 101st or the 10th Mountain or whatever? Does that actually affect how the unit is composed? Or, yeah. Exactly.
So there's no functional difference between like the 101st Airborne and the 10th Mountain. 101st Airborne isn't even technically an airborne division. It's an air assault division now. which
Interesting.
I'm not going to get too much into how outdated and totally useless airborne operations are, because I don't want to draw a lot of hate onto your channel. But yeah, air assault is 100% the way that operations are conducted these days, especially in mountain warfare. You know, airborne operations have their place, airfield seizures, big initial invasions, stuff like that. But these days, anti-air defense is to the point where, you know, early detection would be able to identify imminent airborne drop. And, you know, you might have heard that it's a war crime to shoot a parachuting soldier. It's only a war crime to shoot a pilot who is parachuting out of a damaged aircraft. Does not hold true for airborne soldiers conducting an airborne insertion.
I'd feel very unfairly discriminated against if I couldn't shoot the enemy trying to land in my area.
Well, Geneva Convention. But yeah, I mean, and so that's why the same protections don't apply to, you know, an airborne assault.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why it's obsolete. When you can load just as many or, you know, more soldiers into a Chinook or, you know, a chalk of Chinooks and land them more efficiently and honestly more stealthily. But like I said, I'm not gonna get into it because this is a huge point of contention amongst service members.
That's fine. I mean, for the two people that will watch this video inevitably, I hope they don't have any strong opinions on whether air assaults are conventional. So let's move back to heavy left and heavy right wedge formations.
So the wedge is going to be the most typical movement formation that you see. There's a term, I'm sure, I mean, if you've cracked this book open, it's probably written on about every other page. It's METT-TC. It's just, you say it, MET-TC. It's mission, enemy, terrain, time, something, and civilian. It basically means, like, read the room or understand the context of, you know, where you're maneuvering or what your mission set is. So a wedge works really well for open areas, fields, light woods. So imagine like shoreline, like the exterior of shoreline.
Shoreline or like the older parts of woods where the
for sure
don't get so dense. You know, not really forest, but that's another thing I have to talk about later.
Okay.
No, sorry.
But yeah, like so you're typically going to be moving in a wedge because it's a very defensible position, especially if you're moving in a squad where you're going to have two teams with a squad leader in the middle. Your lead team will be either echelon left or heavy right. Your rear team will be the opposite. So you're more or less maintaining like 180-degree security as you move. You know, you've got the same fighting capability on either side of your formation. The rear is your most exposed. You know, the flank is always the most exposed or vulnerable part. But typically, you know, your flank is facing the area you've just moved through. So there's a little bit of a lax, or you know that you've just come through an area that you've secured as you move through it. And so you typically do want the majority of your security being looking to your left and right flanks versus your rear flank. And then your point man, it really should be your most experienced team leader or member of the team. Just because you might be assigned as the team leader or the squad leader or whatever, if you're in an area where, you know, one of your team members for some reason has a lot more experience in that area or is just better with a map and compass or his pace count than you are, that's the guy you want up front.
So that'd be, like a Tarkov, that'd be, you know, whoever's most familiar with the map or the area of the map, et cetera, depending on the level of the squad. And one question. So the in the Ranger's Handbook, they do make a point on spacing between Rangers in moving information in fireteam formation. So that's they said about 10 meters. How does that get played in practice? Is it about 10 meters, more or less?
It typically ends up being less. And the reason for that is a lot of guys. So you got to think about like the collective experience of the average infantry team. All right. So a team consists of a sergeant, E5 type team leader, probably 2 specialists, E4s, and a private, or maybe a sergeant, a specialist, a private first class, and a private. So collectively, I mean, they're probably tops going to have like 5 years of like field training experience under their belt. And so a lot of the time that spacing gets really reduced because your team leader is going to start getting nervous because he can't, immediately just look over and put his hand on the guy next to him, or speak in a normal voice and the guy next to him hear him.
Yeah, that could pose a problem for communication and reaction.
But in more experienced or more disciplined units, 10 meters is about standard. That's going to be for, non-obstructed visibility, light forest, something that doesn't have a lot of thick underbrush or something like that. But say you're in a, very hilly or mountainous area, to where if the guy, you're the team leader, the guy on your left is 10 meters away, that means the guy on his left is going to be 20 meters away from you.
Yeah.
It's about 60 feet. That's a pretty fair distance away. And what you really don't ever want to do is allow any member of the team to lose sight of the team leader or the point man.
So when terrain becomes more like, confused and complicated, you want to be closer so you can retain that cohesion, right?
Exactly. So whenever terrain, does become more restrictive, or low light situations, your team or your squad or whoever will oftentimes move into a file.
Okay.
When that happens, you're gonna have you can see in the handbook it shows the team leader in the number 2 spot. That's you're still gonna have your point man or your most experienced guy up front leading the file, and then if it's a platoon or a squad, you're gonna have your squad leader at the rear. So your squad leader knows, okay, I'm the last guy. I don't have to worry about anybody behind me. I can trust the guy that's leading us. So the only thing that I need to worry about is if I can call up to him and, he says we're good, we're heading in the right direction, then you're squared away.
Okay, so I actually have a couple things to say. A couple questions to pose, actually. So we're talking mostly, like, theoretically to, this would be Ranger Doctrine, or U.S. military doctrine, reconnaissance, whatever. Yes.
Sorry, allow me to interrupt you there, because the Ranger Handbook is ubiquitous across the infantry.
Okay, that's good to know, because I know very little about the U.S. military.
it was written by Rangers and specifically for the 75th Ranger Regiment. Well, rather, students at Ranger School, which it used to be just the 75th Ranger Regiment, but it's more or less, it's just like what's a little bit higher than the standard, right? Because the U.S. Army has its own book of SOPs and tactics and stuff like that. But any infantry unit worth its salt is going to pull directly from Ranger's Handbook.
Okay, that is interesting to know. I did not know that it was more like, depending on the unit's experience and knowledge of inner workings of military doctrine, whether they would choose to use Army or Ranger doctrine, or ubiquitous, I guess as you put it.
Yeah, so Ranger School actually it's considered more of a leadership school now. So typically, like, officers, squad leaders, platoon leaders, stuff like that, they get sent to Ranger School. And so they absorb this book so that they can come back. Because really, once you start getting into it, the majority of the Ranger's Handbook is teaching you how to lead other soldiers.
Okay. So it's a fairly useful tool for organization and leadership.
Absolutely, yeah. And because, every soldier is expected to know at least, 1 level up, 2 levels down as far as the job descriptions and responsibilities, everybody reads the Ranger's Handbook.
Okay, well, that makes sense. But now let me ask, we'll go away from that tangent. In Tarkov, things are a lot different than just simply an open field and low wood lines. And you're kind of always expecting contact. So how is, or how should I say this? How is that going to change? And also, another good question that I had, or not a good question, none of my questions could be considered good because I know nothing. But another question I had was, in the book, the team leader or the person with the most leadership ability is put in front or second front, or in the V formation. There's two people in front of him, but that's not important, right? He's usually towards the front. And Tarkov, what I like to preach in my doctrine was that you should keep the team leader in the back so he can manage and coordinate people, because of usually things get very hectic and someone needs to control the information and relay quickly. What do you think of that idea? Just what do you think about it?
What you're going to find, because it's the likelihood and the happenstance of a 4 or 5 man team being on their own and conducting any significant amount of maneuver is, man, if that's happened, something has gone.
Oh yeah, that's your very worst case scenario.
Yeah, there are other units, Rista, Lurs, SEALs, like there are those guys, and it's really only in reconnaissance only applications where you will get teams that small, and their goal is 100% non-detection.
Yeah.
And so realistically, movements in the size of the team that Tarkov allows you, it never really happens with any frequency in real life. But in Tarkov, the way that you take that team leader and you pull him to the back, or the most experienced member, that is exactly what would happen in a larger size force. So a squad, right? Your squad leader is going to walk between your two teams. Squad's made up of 2 teams. Typically, a platoon is made up of 3 squads plus an attached weapons team. Your highest echelon leader is never going to be up front.
Okay.
Because if he buys a farm, then that's going to put a ton of pressure on the guy that's supposed to be filling his shoes.
Yeah, because then you got to immediately full. Also, I've never heard someone say buying a farm is a edge. Okay, never mind. That was hilarious. I kind of giggled to myself, but yeah, that's what when I was going over what maybe Tarkov doctrine should be like. I had a very big problem with how to keep the team leader, or the fire team leader, or the squad leader in this case, because a Tarkov squad's 5 people, 4 people maybe, alive but relevant to combat. So
yeah, so in Tarkov as well as real life, if you're Sherping or something like that, you shouldn't be doing the heavy lifting as far as combat goes, because realistically, right past a certain point, once you take away positioning and map knowledge and gear and all that other stuff, Tarkov is not incredibly different than a lot of other shooters. Time to kill, weapon accuracy, weapon behavior, stuff like that, it's all very similar to other popular first-person shooters.
Yeah.
It's all those other things that come before that give you or your team the upper hand in fights.
Yeah, it's positioning and awareness that, when you 3/4 of the battle in Tarkov, it's very little about actually hitting your shots, because that's kind of the easier part. It's rather
absolutely
out thinking and out positioning, out preempting your enemy, I've noticed.
For sure. Yep. Yeah, it's operating in such a way that as much as you can, you're ensuring that you are already in a better position than any enemy that might engage you. And so the team leader, or the squad leader, his relevance to the actual heavy lifting of combat is already incredibly diminished, as it should be.
Yeah.
So whenever you're in a protracted firefight in real life, your squad leader should be low on ammo, not because he's been shooting his gun so much, but because he's been giving his ammo out to guys that have been shooting a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
So
that's actually something I'd never heard before. That's useful to know.
when you think about it like that, if you're the most experienced guy in a team in Tarkov, what you should be doing is sort of staying in the middle of the pack, not necessarily the back, right? Because Tarkov is very different from real life in the way that there isn't a safe direction. You know, just because you've just come out of a building and you cleared it, it doesn't mean that in 10 seconds a team isn't going to come pouring out of it on your ass.
Yeah,
And so
how,
you keep that guy in the middle of the pack to sort of keep everything regulated so that he can tell the team, okay, we're going to move from here to here. This is how we're going to get there. This is the path we're going to take. And so you're constantly making these little adjustments as the team moves so that when the team does get into contact, the full burden of that firefight won't be on the most experienced guy.
Yeah, I think I personally have a problem with that. Is I usually have like the most hours of anyone in my squad, and I just gotta take point because so another thing in Tarkov I've noticed is that people like they have a hard time listening to directions, even if it's made clear that you're trying to kind of direct the flow of things. So people will shoot off in random directions and people will move. But I guess that's totally tangential because I guess the optimal world, right? Tactics is not supposed to be, applied literally, more applied. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But you know what I mean. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me rein it back in and reset myself.
Okay.
So in Tarkov, it's like, how did I say it the other night? On your stream about tactics and doctrine. I said that Tarkov is like kind of a simulation of small unit survival, pretty much. How to move and operate effectively with the end goal of only surviving through an area.
Yep.
And my question there would be, is the wedge obsolete in that manner? If you are trying to push away or to push forward in an open space like the optimal engagement, is it still useful in Tarkov? Could it be applied?
No. And I'd say that with a good amount of confidence because the wedge has a really large footprint. When you look at it in these diagrams here, and I'm sure in the video, we'll be able to see the exact diagram that I'm talking about right now. Yeah. The wedge has the largest footprint of any of those 6 formations we see right there. Mm-hmm. Whereas the file is, much more confined.
Yeah, or so like Diamond and V, they're all fairly compact.
Yeah. The V, honestly, man, I don't know if I've ever seen a real life application of the V. I think there's probably a very specific application that is listed here in the Ranger Handbook or somewhere else rangery. But yeah, it's just not very practical.
Yeah, it seems like it feels very odd because you're stacking most of your things to the front, most of your assets to the front. But you also have someone watching your back or traveling behind the squad leader. I don't know, just from someone who has no experience, I don't know how you would ever use that. In fact, why you couldn't just use like a wedge or a file or an echelon, of course, stacked one side or the other, same thing.
You can use it when you're moving through buildings. Like if you're moving from one room to another and you are continually traveling down hallways, you can fall back into a V. A lot of the time you'll say, okay, well, we're going to move in a diamond through this hallway, and it just ends up sort of becoming a V. So what you're doing at that point is as you're moving through the building, you're clearing these rooms. And so you want to present, the most of your defense forward as possible. Yeah. And having 2 burly infantrymen abreast in a regular size hallway, anybody that steps out into that hallway is going to have a very bad time if both of those dudes are fixated down the hall. Yeah,
of course. And actually, that brings me to another thing I wanted to talk about, because a lot of the content that I've since deleted because it was so bad I could barely watch it myself without having an aneurysm. But baby steps. You gotta start from somewhere. Was focused towards streets of Tarkov.
Yeah.
And what I'm really interested in, so we've established that most things, like maybe with the exception of the line in the file, because I actually actively use that sometimes when I'm squad leading in Tarkov, whether it's called the file or the line. Just reminding everyone, hey, can you space the fuck out? Or can you kind of get in a line? Whatever. But I want to know the doctrine of moving through urban environments, and I want to know if there is any, or through city environments, I should say. I don't know how it's structured. I don't know exactly all the contents of this book, so I assume there is a section that at least pertains to moving down, like, a large road, or trying to get as much coverage into different buildings, etc., etc. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, and the fact that I don't know it off the top of my head, if any of my old platoon sergeants knew that I could not immediately tell you what chapter it is, I'm pretty sure it's 12. Right? I'm flipping through the book right now.
Scroll to 12 using the PDF format.
I believe chapter 12 is either entitled Military Operations in Urban Terrain or Urban Ops.
Yeah, because a lot of this from a very superficial level to me looked like a lot of things designed to be combating more like asymmetrical warfare type situations rather than oh, Jesus Christ, I'm in chapter 7. Hold on. I'm going to have to go to the glossary here.
It's the handbook is really geared towards, with the exception of this chapter, that it's 12. I found it. It's 12. It's called Urban Operations.
Okay, I'm trying to get there right now. Hold on.
But you'll see, I mean, with the exception of, like, maybe convoy ops or military mountaineering, which the only reason military mountaineering is such a dense chapter is because there's about 1 million fucking knots. And it talks about, like, very technically difficult stuff, like rappelling. There's a thing called a Swiss seat, and that you can essentially make your own rappel harness, and that's called a Swiss seat, and just by tying ropes around your waist and your hips in a specific way. But that's why that one's so dense. But really, I think chapter 12 is quite possibly the most dense as far as any of the theoretical chapters go.
Interesting.
And it's because urban operation, I mean, it could be its own book.
Yeah, there's some very interesting precedents to, like, show how urban ops flow, that I think you could make a really good book on if I had read it, if I'd read this chapter, which I wish. But can you just give me a brief summary of how, well, I got a question. Have you ever operated in a semi-urban environment?
Yes. Not in what I would call an overt combat situation, which that would be, so, like, I never went to Iraq.
Okay.
All of my combat experience is from Afghanistan.
That makes sense. I didn't think you were in Iraq. I think that was a little past. When did you say you were first deployed?
2000. It's either the very tail end of 2012 or the very beginning of 13. I'm pretty sure it was like January of 2013.
Yes, if my memory does not fail me, I don't think we were still involved in Iraq in 2012.
Buddy, I bet there's U.S. uniforms in Iraq right now.
Yeah, well, in a major scale at least.
Yeah, so in 2010, Operation Iraqi Freedom was actually reflagged to something called Operation New Dawn. And that was really when the handover to the Iraqi army started. And so, like you said, in no, certainly in no capacity similar to U.S. troop involvement in Iraq in like 2006 or 2004.
Yeah. Yeah.
That ship had long sailed.
Yeah, it's the tail end of the conflict, kind of, sort of. If that makes sense. If that's accurate, you can always correct me on anything I say. I don't take any offense.
I mean, well, considering it's part of the global war on terror, which I think is still officially ongoing. But yeah, towards the end of heavy combat patrols led by, not necessarily even led by, because that probably still happens to a certain extent, but definitely combat patrols that consisted 100% of American troops.
Okay.
From my understanding, basically stopped 100% around the 2010 2011 timeframe.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know much about our U.S. involvement in Iraq, besides a little bit about the Battle of Fallujah, but that's...
So 2003 was the invasion.
Yeah.
3rd Infantry Division took Baghdad in like 4 days or something like that.
I'm pretty sure that's also when we like absolutely... Yeah, no. Sorry, continue.
Following that, comparatively, things were a little quiet. 2003, 2004. And then 2005 was really when a lot of the insurgency picked up. Because you got to remember, at the beginning of the war, we weren't fighting, Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab or, what would eventually become ISIL or anything like that. It was the Iraqi army.
Yeah, it was
Saddam's Republican Guard.
It was more conventional forces.
Absolutely, yeah. You did see uniforms, and then 2005, 2006 is really when it took a heavy right turn into, a counterinsurgency. And around that time is when you might have heard this term. It's called the surge. When troop commitment grew by almost like tenfold, practically overnight. Mm-hmm. And the Army and the Marines, they were taking anybody. You could be like pending felony charges, and they'd stick you in a uniform and get you on a plane.
Interesting.
And that's when the first and second battles of Fallujah occurred during that time frame. And then it did take a sharp decline. Not necessarily the violence, but certainly once the Obama administration came in, Iraq was dialed back a lot because the focus was shifted to Afghanistan.
Yeah. But reading Fallujah from like hindsight, it seems like it would seem like a battle comparable to maybe Grozny in 1995, but like a lot worse on the part of the insurgents. Whatever. It's totally different. What was I going to say? So,
urban operations. Have I ever operated in?
Have you ever operated
could be considered an urban environment?
Urban environment.
Enough to where I understand what movement techniques you'd want to use.
Okay, and I got one more. We'll lead into that. Have you seen the screenshots of like what is to be Streets of Tarkov? Some of the,
I've seen the videos and watch all Nolan Nice Guys updates all the time.
Nice Guy. Oh, dude, if anyone here is still watching to this point and knows who Nice Guy is, dude, go give that motherfucker a sub. He deserves it so much, dude. He keeps me in track about Tarkov all the time.
Absolutely. I'm convinced that the press armor is actually Nice Guy's streamer item because he is the hardest working journalist that's covering Escape from Tarkov.
Oh my god, totally. He's the reporter. He's the Tarkov correspondent. That should
Absolutely.
be his nickname because of how much like accurate information he's able to deliver on a regular basis.
For sure.
But you understand, it's going to be wide open streets with buildings flanking the sides and many windows. Or like destroyed concrete buildings, as we saw, depending. It's the lore of Tarkov. It's supposed to be kind of like an impoverished crime city-ish. Very shiny on the outside, not so good on the inside. So a lot of the infrastructure should be quite fucked up by the time we get in there. Boots on the ground, which is still in like another year. So this is a long time to mature. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's we're fermenting right now. You can't rush greatness.
Yeah, we can't get too ahead of ourselves. But you know the urban environment that I'm talking about. Do you?
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah. Well, can you talk about how some of the urban doctrine you're about to get into could apply to a situation like that?
So, I want to touch back on something that you mentioned earlier, and you're absolutely right. Team tactics in Tarkov is much more closely related to a survival scenario or like a deep reconnaissance scenario, where contact with the enemy in the form of firefight should be like your absolute worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And even so, in like a heavy, deep reconnaissance situation, you wouldn't even want to take like a kill of opportunity. If you found one enemy off by himself, or if you're, an 8-man team and you found like 2 guys out in the middle of the woods in an OP or something like that,
yeah,
you would not want to interact with those guys at all, because their absence is going to be, just as concerning or indicative of your presence as would be them seeing you. If these guys are switching out guard duty every hour, and then the guys coming to relieve them show up and there's just 2 dead bodies instead of 2 guys, then everybody else in the area knows something is up now.
Yeah.
And so Escape from Tarkov, for the most part, should be treated the same way. The idea is to get in, get loot, do a quest, whatever it is you got to do, and then get out. Typically, you're not going in, rocking an airframe with chops and a face shield until you're like level 40 and either fed up and decide you don't want to do any more quests, or have capped and just have like 70 mil in the bank and don't know what to do with it. Yeah. That's when you go in looking for trouble.
And that is also an interesting concept that I've toyed with late at night when I can't think of anything but Tarkov. But how Tarkov is like so different when you're questing. It is so fundamentally different, because it starts. So I think I definitely have talked to you about this before, whether in Twitch chat or through conversation. How Tarkov lacks an objective. You don't go into a raid with like, I'm going to do something. The current meta is I'm going to do like 1 of 5 things. It's really up to me when I spawn in, right? There's no overarching, after you've done quests or get to level 40, you know what I mean? There's no reason for you to conduct yourself a certain way, which means that there's like no defensive buildings. I don't think I've ever seen someone successfully or attempt to hold and fortify a position ever. But there's no taking of key areas or finding of intelligence. It's just, I'm going in and something's going to happen. I hope I come out on top a lot of the time. But I guess the world that I want to envision, and I think Nikita, frankly, is envisioning, is something very far from that. So I just want to make this distinction before we go on. That how about we go forward on the assumptions, on the premise that we have an objective. Okay. And so do other people. So instead of going hunting, we're going to accomplish something. Say, whether to grab a quest item or whatever. You know what I mean?
Sure. Okay. Perfect. I can definitely put myself in that mindset.
Yeah.
So,
continue.
If we want to talk about urban operations and maneuver in that context, pretty much rule number 1 is stay the fuck off the road. Like, that's in a city, when you look around, right? Let's say probably 50%, and I'm talking like a dense metro area, your Houstons, your Seattles, your LAs, your inside the loop areas. 50% of the landscape you see around you is going to be building. Probably 20% of it's going to be sky, and the remainder is going to be road or sidewalk, or there's going to be like single-digit percentages where it's a park or a parking lot or something like that, because modern cities are designed to be traversed by vehicles and not people, which means those areas are very wide open. They typically want for cover. There's not a lot of places to seek either protection or concealment from the enemy. Mm-hmm. And they draw your eyes. Whenever you're on, the fourth or fifth floor of a building and you look out over the city, that's your eyes are just automatically funneled into the roads. So if you're a 4-man team just trucking along straight down the center line, you're probably not going to have a great raid.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think that something that I actually saw when I saw the original Streets like release of the streets of actual streets, like besides going into one of the dormitory areas, was like, holy fuck, those roads are a lot bigger than I thought they were going to be. Like,
yeah, exactly. So, and there's actually a name for those, right? You call those a linear danger area, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a road. It can be a river, or it can be a fire break, or a section of forest that's been cut out for power lines or something like that.
Yeah,
it's anything that's going to more or less serve as a shooting range for anybody that might be on it, observing for anyone that might be crossing it or traveling on it.
It's going to be a murder fest. Like, every scav and their dog is going to be looking out the window waiting for a stupid ass, like, stupid Western capitalist pig to come walk down the street, right?
Exactly. And
like, how many windows can you sweep? it's like hitting whack-a-mole, but you can only watch half of them at a time, and the other half shoot you. Yeah.
So, and the primary method of linear danger area traversal is going to be coming back to what can be distilled as finely as individual movement techniques, buddy team movement techniques, and team movement techniques. So what you want one person to post up on your furthest piece of cover before the linear danger area begins and watch in one direction, either down the left or down the right. You're going to have another guy, typically one of the last guys in the order of march. He's going to come up on the same side of the linear danger area and look the other direction at whatever piece of cover he can find. And once both sides are covered, you're going to send your first guy across, who's going to stop and do the exact same thing on the other side. And your next guy's going to cross and do the exact same thing. So you've got two guys looking in each direction. You can think of it as you've built like this little bridge, and you've got 4 sectors of fire that are going to help protect anybody that's going to be crossing. And the remainder of the team moves through, with the last member crossing being the first guy that went up and assumed that covered position.
Post up, yeah, okay. I proposed an adapted version of this in one of my tarkov doctrine videos, where it was basically you want to create cover or concealment depending on what you have access to, and send 2 people across first, while the rest pull security down both sides.
Absolutely.
You only got 5 people to work with, so you send 2 across, take your heavy element. It could be like your SL, the guy who's running the RPK or whatever, and the guy who brought extra mags. You pull him back, send the sniper and the point man, and just chuck him across the road. See what happens. Draw fire, maybe engage a threat or 2, and then try to move across. If you have no access to cover or concealment. So that's the same concept. Damn, every time I think of something, it's like I've just invented something, but worse. But mine is significantly less thought out.
I was talking about it the other night. That's what's awesome. Tarkov is like this little experiment of, how quickly can an untrained militia develop something that's slightly resembles military tactics. And it's been pretty damn fast.
I mean, it's incredible throughout all of history how a dedicated group, dedicated group of people who just have very basic understandings of tactics and doctrine have been able to completely destroy or give up at least a pretty good fight against a technologically superior enemy. and I'm just going to pull the example one more time of the 1995 New Year's Eve assault on Grozny, because the Chechens smacked like 200 APCs, like IFVs, like fucking destroyed the Russian elements completely. No radios, no nothing. All 4-man teams communicating on the ground level. So I think it's interesting that you point that out, and I'm flattered that some militiamen can pick up a little bit of military doctrine just for playing Tarkov. That's
absolutely, without a doubt. I have a theory that Escape from Tarkov is a government training tool that is going to instill in the lowliest Russian citizen that plays it even just like a cursory knowledge of fireteam tactics. Which is total tinfoil hat material. But
I mean, hey, it's the most interesting tinfoil hat conspiracy making I've heard in a while, so